A baby doesn't understand your words. At least, that's what most people believe. They assume that if a baby is too young to speak, too young to remember, too young to explain what they feel, then nothing really stays. That whatever happens around them just fades. But that's not exactly how it works, because even if your baby doesn't understand what you're saying, they understand something else, something faster, something deeper, the feeling behind it. Now imagine this. You're in the same room. Your baby is there, maybe playing, maybe just observing. Everything feels normal. And then something shifts. Your tone changes. Your voice gets sharper. The rhythm of the moment breaks. And suddenly, the energy in the room is different. Not dramatically, not in a way you would necessarily describe out loud, but different enough. And your baby feels it. Not as a story, not as an argument, but as a change, a shift in the environment they were just beginning to understand. Now here's where it gets interesting. From the outside, your baby might look completely fine. They're not crying, they're not reacting in an obvious way. They might even seem calm. And because of that, it's easy to assume that nothing really happened, that they didn't notice, that it didn't reach them. But something did, because your baby is constantly reading the world around them, not through words, not through logic, but through patterns, through tone, through movement, through the way things feel moment to moment. And when something changes, even slightly, their system picks it up. Now imagine being in a place where everything suddenly feels different, but you don't have the ability to understand why. You can't label it, you can't explain it, you can't ask what's going on. All you can do is feel it and adjust. That's where your baby is, in those moments. And what they do next is not always what people expect, because it doesn't always look like distress. Sometimes it looks like nothing at all. And that's exactly why it's so easy to miss. But what's happening in those quiet moments is more important than it seems, because this is where your baby starts learning something fundamental, not about the argument itself, but about what changes feel like and what happens when they do. Now here's the part almost no one talks about. What your baby's body does right after that shift.
Now here's what most people don't see. Because when a baby is exposed to tension, they don't always react the way you expect. They don't always cry. They don't always get upset. In fact, sometimes they do something that looks like the opposite. They become quieter, still, almost as if nothing is happening. And that's exactly why it's so easy to miss. Because from the outside, it looks like calm. But inside, their system is trying to understand what just changed. Now imagine this moment more closely. Your baby was moving, exploring, making small sounds, following their own rhythm. And then something shifts. Voices get sharper, movements change, there's a break in the flow, and your baby pauses. Not dramatically, not in a way that draws attention, just a pause. Their body becomes slightly more still. Their gaze changes. They start observing more than interacting. And this isn't random, because your baby is constantly scanning the environment, not consciously, but automatically. They're picking up on the tone of your voice, the speed of your movements, the tension in your face, the rhythm of the interaction. And when those things change, their body adjusts. Now here's something even more subtle. Sometimes your baby doesn't become more active, they become more controlled, less expressive, almost like they're holding back. And this is where many people misunderstand what they're seeing, because it can look like calm, but it's not the same kind of calm. It's not relaxed, it's attentive, alert, as if their system is waiting to understand what comes next. Now imagine being in that state repeatedly. Moments where things feel stable, and then suddenly shift. Not in extreme ways, but in small, noticeable changes. Over time, your baby begins to recognize those patterns, not with thoughts, but with feeling. If a certain tone appears, something changes. If voices rise, something shifts. If movements become sharper, the environment feels different, and their body remembers that. Not as a memory you can describe, but as an association. Now here's what makes this even more important. Your baby is not just reacting in the moment. They're learning from it. They're beginning to build a sense of what happens when things change. Do they settle again? Do they stay tense? Do they return to calm? And this is where everything starts to take shape. Because your baby is not trying to understand the situation. They're trying to understand the pattern. What follows what? What leads to what? And whether the world around them is predictable or not. Now here's the part that surprises most people. This doesn't depend on one moment, one argument, one situation. It depends on repetition. What happens again and again and again? Because that's what your baby uses to build understanding, not isolated events, but patterns over time. And that means something important. Even small shifts, if they repeat often enough, begin to carry meaning, not because they are big, but because they are consistent. Now think about how easy it is to miss this, because nothing looks dramatic, nothing looks urgent, nothing forces your attention, but something is happening, quietly, and it's shaping how your baby begins to experience connection itself. Now here's where everything starts to change, because what matters most is not just what happens in those moments, but what happens after them.
Now this is where everything shifts. Because up to this point, it's easy to think the important part is the moment itself, the argument, the tension, the change in tone. But that's not what defines the experience. What defines it is what happens next. Now imagine the same moment again. The tension appears, the atmosphere changes, your baby feels it, and then life just continues. No clear transition, no shift back, no signal that things have settled. From the outside, it looks like the moment is over. But from your baby's perspective, something changed and never fully returned, and that matters. Because your baby experienced a disruption without experiencing the resolution. Now imagine a different version of that exact same moment. The tension appears, the shift happens, but this time something follows. Your voice softens, your pace slows down, your movements become more gentle. There's a noticeable change back toward calm. Not exaggerated, not forced, just natural. You come back into the interaction, you reconnect, maybe through your tone, maybe through your presence, maybe through something as simple as how you look at your baby again. And your baby feels that transition, that return. And suddenly, the same moment carries a completely different meaning. Because it didn't just happen, it resolved. And this is the part most people miss. Your baby is not only learning from what happens, they're learning from how things come back together, from how connection is restored, from how stability returns after something shifts. Now think about how powerful that is. Because this means your baby doesn't need a perfect environment. They don't need everything to always be calm. They don't need you to avoid every difficult moment. What they need is a pattern they can rely on. A pattern where even when something changes, it comes back. And when that pattern repeats, something very important begins to form. Not in words, not in thoughts, but in how their body responds to connection.
They begin to expect return. They begin to trust the rhythm. They begin to relax into the experience because they're no longer reacting only to the moment. They're responding to the pattern behind it. Now, here's something that most people don't realize. The return doesn't need to be big. It doesn't need to be a special action. It doesn't need to be perfect. It can be subtle. The way your voice sounds again, the way your body relaxes, the way you slow down, the way you re-enter the interaction. Because your baby is not looking for perfection, they're looking for consistency. That sense that even when something shifts, it settles again. Now imagine how different that feels. Not a world where nothing ever changes, but a world where change is followed by return, where disruption is followed by reconnection, where tension is followed by calm. That's what creates stability, not the absence of difficult moments, but the presence of recovery. And once that becomes familiar, those moments of tension stop being confusing and start becoming understandable, not as events, but as part of a pattern that resolves. And that changes everything. Because now your baby is not just experiencing moments, they're learning what to expect from connection itself. And what they expect shapes how they respond. Now there's one last piece to this, because even if all of this makes sense, there's something very simple that still gets overlooked.
And this is where everything comes together. Because when you step back and look at all of this, what your baby is really learning is not about a single moment. It's about the overall experience of being with you. Now imagine this from their perspective. They don't see arguments. They don't understand problems. They don't label situations the way adults do. What they experience is something much simpler, but much more powerful. A feeling. The feeling of what it's like to be in that space, to be around those voices, to be inside that rhythm. And that feeling is not built from one moment. It's built from everything combined. The calm moments, the connected moments, the moments where things shift, and the moments where they return. Now picture two different environments. In one, there are moments of tension, but they are followed by something else. A softening, a return, a reconnection. The rhythm breaks, and then it comes back together. In the other, the moments of tension appear, and then simply fade. No clear return, no transition, no reconnection. From the outside, both might look similar. Nothing extreme, nothing dramatic, but from the inside, they feel completely different. Because in one, there is a pattern your baby can rely on, and in the other, there are gaps. And your baby lives inside that difference, not in the events themselves, but in how those events are resolved. Now here's what changes how you see all of this. Your baby is not measuring you. They're not keeping track of what you did right or wrong. They're not remembering specific situations. They're adapting. Their system is constantly adjusting to what happens most often. And that means something important. You don't need to control every moment. You don't need to avoid every mistake. You don't need to create a perfect environment. What matters is the pattern you create over time. The way connection feels most of the day. The way things return after they shift. The way stability shows up again and again. Because those small moments, they don't disappear. They accumulate, quietly. And over time, they shape something much bigger. A sense of what connection feels like. A sense of what to expect from others. A sense of whether the world settles or stays uncertain. And all of that begins here. In moments that don't look important.
in shifts that seem small, in returns that are easy to overlook. Now imagine the next time something changes, the next time the tone shifts, the next time the rhythm breaks. Instead of focusing on the moment itself, you focus on what comes after. You soften, you soften, you come back, even in a small way. And your baby feels that return, that reconnection. And that changes how the entire moment is experienced. Not as something confusing, but as something that makes sense. Because it didn't just happen, it resolved. And over time, that becomes the pattern. Not perfection, not control, but something much more powerful. Consistency. So the next time something shifts, remember this. You don't need to fix everything. You just need to come back. Because for your baby, that return is what gives meaning to everything else. And that is what they carry forward. If this made you see those moments differently, subscribe. Because understanding what your baby actually experiences changes everything.